Mr. Bloom, welcome. We're delighted to have this hearing today. Welcome to this appropriations hearing on the fiscal year 2023 President's Budget Request for the Environmental Protection Agency. Administrator Regan, we are in a climate emergency. On everyday life, we're feeling the impacts. Out in Oregon, we feel it through the wildfire season. We're seeing it through heat waves and through drought, through dropping groundwater levels, through decreased average snowpacks, through warmer, smaller streams for our trout and our salmon, and we certainly see it offshore where our kelp forests are being decimated by an ecosystem driven out of balance by the warmer, more acidic ocean waters. As we come together today, a massive wildfire is threatening communities in New Mexico. Been doing so for more than a month, uprooting lives and communities as tens of thousands of people have been forced to evacuate. And it's shocking how normalized deadly months-long fire seasons have become over just a decade. As you know, the Environmental Protection Agency has a critical role in tackling climate chaos. The Clean Air Act charges EPA to protect our communities from greenhouse gas pollution. And those same communities are counting on EPA to act swiftly and boldly. The impacts are here now, and we don't have any time to waste. We need to act with urgency to address our country's long history of environmental justice. Everyone in this country deserves clean air, clean water, and a stable climate. But we know that the burdens of environmental pollution disproportionately fall on the shoulders of low-income communities and communities of color. And I'm very pleased that our fiscal year 2022 appropriations bill took an important step to address this injustice, providing a historic level of $100 million for EPA's Environmental Justice Program. This significant increase will support community-driven projects to improve local environments and public health, will embed environmental justice voices throughout the agency, helping ensure the EPA programs and decision-making are responsive to on-the-ground stakeholders. Of course, much more work remains to make the progress we need to remedy environmental justice challenges. Administrator Regan, I applaud your continued focus on expanding EPA's efforts as reflected in the FY fiscal year 2023 budget request. And I look forward to hearing how the agency has moved to spend last year's FY22 money effectively, efficiently, and for this proposed increase that you have in this budget. And I want to emphasize the importance of continuing the work to ban asbestos from our shelves. More than 60 nations, virtually every developed nation, has already recognized asbestos as a deadly substance and has acted to protect citizens by banning it. And it's time for us to join the rest of the developed world. And I appreciate EPA's recent commitment to ban the most common form of asbestos, one of the 6 asbestos fibers. It's welcome progress, but we need to absolutely end this dangerous public health threat once and for all. Today is also an opportunity to hear about how EPA is administering the more than $55 billion for water infrastructure, Superfund, cleanups, other programs funded in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. These resources will help communities finally make progress on long-standing challenges. All across Oregon, I hear from small, underserved communities with crumbling water infrastructure that struggle to provide reliable, clean drinking water or maintain wastewater systems. We need to prioritize programs that can reach these communities who can't come up with financing or matching funds equal to the huge price tags that these water projects require. I look forward to discussing with you how EPA is working to ensure the funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill and EPA's existing water programs is reaching these underserved communities and how this subcommittee can be a partner in that effort. These one-time investments can make a real difference across the country. But we shouldn't have reached this crisis point in our infrastructure in the first place. We need enduring, consistent progress in addressing our environmental challenges, and for that, we need major changes to our annual budget. We need to rebuild our environmental protection framework, which was battered by the decade of budget caps and by short-sighted efforts to deliberately dismantle or damage this framework. As Congress has charged EPA with additional responsibilities to address toxic chemicals, eliminate climate-warming hydrofluorocarbons, support water infrastructure, and the agency's resources have not kept pace with these expanded duties. They have not even remained level. The agency's workforce is down nearly 3,000 staff below its 2010 total, down to numbers not seen since the 1980s. And we certainly know that the challenges are increasing, not decreasing. And as states, tribes, and local partners have faced new responsibilities, their grant funding has also deteriorated in real terms. I was disappointed that the fiscal year 2022 budget deal did not allow us to accommodate the full scale of need for rebuilding the EPA and its grant programs supporting state, tribal, and local programs. And I'm relieved we were able to avoid more of a backslide, but I look forward to the conversation today on the fiscal year 2023 request on where we can actually make additional progress. On far too many of the challenges our communities face, there is a common theme. We are behind, we are overdue, we are late, we need urgency, we need boldness. The impacts are here now. There is not a second to waste. I want to impress upon you today the urgent need for EPA to take bold action on its vital mission of protecting human health and the environment. With that, I'll turn the microphone over to Ranking Member Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Administrator, welcome back to the committee. I am glad to be talking about EPA's fiscal year 2023 budget request. I think it's fair to say that it's been a big year for the agency since you testified before us last June. In that time, Congress passed both the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the FY22 omnibus. As one of the negotiators for that bipartisan infrastructure bill, I'm very proud of what we were able to include with over $60 billion in needed investments to our aging infrastructure through EPA programs. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act included almost $50 billion for water infrastructure improvements, $5 billion to help clean up contaminated sites, and also $275 million for a new grant program under the Save Our Seas Act to help our communities better handle waste and recycling management. I have always prioritized funding for EPA programs that really do focus on getting tangible results in providing cleaner air, cleaner water, and support for our lands across the country. As you know, because we've had many conversations about this, Alaska has some unique needs and challenges on infrastructure, and therefore it's just an imperative that we continue to work together to ensure that Alaska receives the intended benefits from these investments that we've just talked about. I do appreciate, I'm very grateful that representatives from the agency attended a grant symposium that we held in Anchorage just last month. It was not only well attended, it was extraordinarily well attended by people from across the state. About 1,300 people flew into Anchorage to come to listen to representatives from the agencies. And what I got back in terms of feedback was it was not only that I got a glossy brochure on the benefits of certain programs, they actually got answers to status on different projects. And so very appreciative for that level of engagement. But I do hope that a high level of engagement will continue as the agency rolls out this infrastructure funding, but also with the congressionally directed spending projects that are contained in the FY22 omnibus. I know that many in my state are particularly anxious right now as they're awaiting the guidance on CDSs from the agency on how and when they might receive their funding. While we have done a lot of great work together on infrastructure and other issues, I unfortunately must note that I do have some serious concerns on some of the regulatory actions under this administration, and particularly as it has to do with waters of the United States. I believe that the new WOTUS rule proposed last year is too broad, and it fails to recognize the special characteristics on the ground in Alaska. And this continued ambiguity on a definition, along with the overreach of the current proposal, is going to have impact, and it will be a negative impact on economic development within Alaska. I was happy to be able to host a WOTUS roundtable in Alaska. Thank you for making sure that Assistant Administrator Fox was there. I think that that was a very good opportunity for that kind of back and forth. It's my hope that many of the concerns that were voiced by state officials and other Alaskans that she heard at that roundtable will be reflected in the final rule. So, unsurprisingly, we can't agree on every issue out there, but know that I do appreciate your willingness, your continued willingness to hear me out on some of these issues. Some of them are more controversial than others, but also your commitment to work with me on so many of these important matters to Alaska. One longstanding issue to my state has been the contaminated lands that the federal government conveyed to Alaska and to Alaska Native communities decades ago. A large percentage of these contaminated lands, as you know, have not yet been cleaned up, and the federal government for too long has not shown any real willingness or interest to accept the responsibility that is theirs for the remediation of these lands. And we know because we see it played out all the time. If this was a private entity, some business or corporation, and they failed to comply with cleanup and remediation, they'd be out of there. They'd be sued. Instead, it's the federal government. And even adding further insult to the injury is knowing that in so many cases, contaminated lands were conveyed to Alaska Native peoples as a settlement for their Native claims as part of the Native Claims Settlement Act. So, Administrator, I appreciate the openness that you and your team have shown so far in engaging on this issue and for agreeing to explore some creative solutions. I think Assistant Administrator Fox clearly felt this is a matter of environmental justice to our Alaska Native and to our rural communities. And I know that that's important to you. I know that's important to this administration. So as the agency looks to expand its role in helping on contaminated lands, I'm going to be asking for your support in having us work together to make some real progress on this issue. So as we look to the FY23 budget request, the agency proposes significant new increases across accounts. There are some proposed increases in the request that I can support, a number that I can't. And I commend the request, though, for maintaining strong support for state and tribal grant and loan programs, along with the other infrastructure investments already mentioned. I think that these programs achieve real, on-the-ground improvements for communities nationwide. I'm also pleased to note that the request prioritizes funding for efforts to better understand and tackle PFAS. So many communities in my state, and I know in others as well, face PFAS contamination and the problems that poses for providing clean water and other services to residents. So we need to both prevent new PFAS contamination as well as remediate contaminated areas as soon as possible. So I'm hoping to hear more on how the budget request will achieve just that and build upon the funding that we provided in the infrastructure law to help with PFAS remediation. So again, I want to express my appreciation for your personal commitment to work with me on many of these issues that may be very discrete, very unique to Alaska. I do hope that along with our conversations, our staffs can once again set up the All Things Alaska calls so we can kind of go down our list as we work through some of these measures. So I'll have an opportunity to present some questions to you throughout, but again, my thanks for being here this morning and for the level of engagement that we've had to date. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Administrator Regan, we look forward to your testimony.
Well, thank you, and Chairman Merkley and Ranking Member Mikowski and members of this committee. I truly appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the bold vision laid out in the United States EPA's proposed fiscal year 2023 budget request. In this budget request, we lay out an ambitious and transformative plan for the EPA with the goal of a healthier, more prosperous nation where all people have equal access to clean air, clean water, and healthier communities. President Biden's proposed FY 2023 budget request for EPA provides $11.9 billion to advance key priorities, including tackling the climate crisis, delivering environmental justice and equity for all, protecting air quality, upgrading the nation's aging water infrastructure, and rebuilding core functions at the agency to support and keep pace with the growing economy. Over the last year, we've made important progress towards many of these goals, and I'm proud of the foundation that we've laid together throughout our partnerships that have underpinned our success. But there's still much more work to be done to ensure that all children have safe, healthy places to live, learn, and play, build a stronger, more sustainable economy, and to advance American innovation and ingenuity. Put simply, investing in EPA is an investment in the health and well-being of all the communities we serve and in the economic vitality of this great nation. I've had the privilege to visit many of your communities in your states and see firsthand the environmental and public health challenges many of your constituents continue to experience, from unprecedented flooding events to crumbling wastewater infrastructure. I've even spoken to mothers whose children have been lead poisoned. I've met with people who are living with toxic waste in their backyards. I've seen conditions that are simply unacceptable in the United States of America. From investing in our nation's climate resilience to cleaning up contaminated lands, there is no shortage of critical work to be done. But members of this committee, let me assure you, EPA is up to the task. We're eager to work with all of you to deliver for our fellow Americans and to secure our nation's global competitiveness. But we need your support. Both the urgency and economic opportunity presented by climate change require that we leave no stone unturned. The 2023 budget invests $773 million towards tackling the climate crisis and reaping the benefits that come with it: healthier communities, good-paying jobs, and increased energy security. The communities hit the hardest by pollution and climate change are most often communities of color, indigenous communities, our rural communities, and economically disadvantaged communities. For generations, many of these communities have been overburdened with higher instances of polluted air, water, and land. This inequity of environmental protection is not just an environmental issue, justice issue, but it's a civil rights issue as well. In FY 2023, EPA will expand upon its historic investments made in environmental justice and civil rights to reduce the historically disproportionate health impacts of pollution in communities with environmental justice concerns. Across the budget, EPA is investing more than $1.4 billion to advance environmental justice, clean up legacy pollution, and create good-paying jobs in the process. Across the country, poor air quality affects millions of people, perpetuating harmful health and economic impacts. In FY 2023, the agency will protect our air quality by cutting emissions of ozone-forming pollutants, particulate matter, and air toxics. The President's budget includes $1.1 billion to improve air quality and set standards that reduce pollution from both mobile and stationary sources. A thriving economy also requires clean and safe water for all. Although progress has been made, many still lack access to healthy water, face inadequate wastewater infrastructure, and suffer the effects of lead pipes. America's water systems are also facing new challenges, including cybersecurity threats, climate change, and emerging contaminants such as PFAS. This budget proposes more than $4 billion to upgrade drinking water and wastewater infrastructure nationwide, with a focus on underserved communities. These investments build on the historic resources allocated in the bipartisan infrastructure law. The FY 2023 President's budget positions EPA to create durable environmental policy that sets our nation on a path to win the 21st century. It increases the agency's capacity to allow us to meet the pressing need faced by millions of Americans and fundamentally improve people's lives for the better. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here today and offer this testimony, and I look forward to our continued partnership to achieve these ambitious yet necessary goals. And I welcome all of your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we have your lengthier, more detailed written testimony, which I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. So ordered. So you mentioned the climate and the funding for climate. What are the most important funding increases for making progress in tackling climate chaos? In staff, in research, in grants? What's the vision?
You know, thank you for that question. We have a very strong vision, and the 2023 budget request covers a range of those. On standards, we want to focus on the implementation of the bipartisan AIM Act, which will phase down the consumption in production of HFCs. We want to hit that mark of an 85% reduction over the next 15 years. So the agency requests an additional $35 million and 28 FTE to be sure that we can do that. We also want to continue to focus on keeping pace with the growing economy and the demands of the market and the employment of our strong unions by continuing to push on the light-duty vehicles and the heavy-duty vehicles transition to a lower carbon transportation economy. We want to continue to focus on very innovative and transformative technology standards like the one to reduce methane from the oil and gas sector, technology standards that allow for artificial intelligence, remote sensing, and just fascinating innovation and entrepreneurship that can help capture that lost product while also protecting the planet. And then also we are having some very engaging conversations around the power plant sector. The budget requests $100 million for air quality grants for states and tribes. We believe that states and tribes and localities know their communities better than the federal government ever could. And on the research side, $60 million to improve the knowledge of the impacts of climate change on human health. So we've got some really what I would call pragmatic but focused requests as it relates to climate change and public health.
You can largely sum up the challenge ahead as electrifying everything with renewable energy to decrease both the massive methane and carbon dioxide releases. And one piece of that is electric vehicles. And you have laid out we have laid out in the bipartisan infrastructure law, $5 billion to replace diesel school buses. So it's one piece of that initiative. And we have in the omnibus, fiscal year 22 omnibus, $92 million to replace diesel engines through DERA, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. And so we're starting to see the impacts of this. 11 school districts in Oregon are preparing to use electric school buses as part of their fleet, but it's just the very beginning of this effort. How will this new funding speed up a transition to electric vehicles?
It's critical. We're definitely building on the success of the DERA program, and we're grateful for those resources to do that. DERA, for a long time, has demonstrated how funding support for cutting-edge clean technologies reduce exposure to diesel emissions. For all people, I'm really excited and get really excited to talk about the $5 billion for clean school buses. There's nothing more important than cleaning up the yellow school buses that carry our most precious cargo to and from school every day. And so there are approximately 500,000 school buses on the road right now. The $5 billion for clean school buses is going to be transformational in terms of better protection for our children and our school bus drivers, but it sends a very strong signal to the manufacturers as well that there's a market demand for these cleaner vehicles.
Okay, so brass tacks, when will you start awarding the school bus replacement grants?
We're going to make an announcement very soon about the first tranche of grants. It'll be $500 million. That's very soon, and we're excited about that. And then the second tranche will come a few months after. And by the way, we're going to make it as easy as possible. We want these resources to be able to go directly to these school districts. So we're going to have online access, and we're going to have easy forms, and we're also going to have built-in technical assistance to these school districts to be sure that those districts that need them the most actually get the resources.
Is very soon like June?
Very soon is next couple of weeks. We're going to make a very important announcement.
Great. And then I want to turn to the issue of wildfire smoke. We didn't used to talk about smoke, but so many of our fires burn so long and in such a fashion that smoke is having a huge impact. It's affecting our agriculture. It's affected the grapes, our wine grapes. It's affected all kinds of community efforts, including, like, for example, the furniture salesman who says, how do I sell this furniture that, everything smells with wildfire smoke? Not to mention what people are breathing and their need for places they can go, the aggravation of asthma. It's just having a significant impact on our children, impact on our adults. The problem's getting worse. So I'm very pleased that in the omnibus, I secured $4 million to start a new EPA grant program that helps communities prepare for and protect against wildfire smoke. So can you tell me, have grants gone out the door, and is this going to help communities better protect themselves and the community members?
It absolutely will help us communicate more effectively to moms who want to go out for jogs or children who want to go out and play and are not really understanding what the implications of wildfire smoke may be from thousands of miles away. So this is going to give EPA a competitive advantage to communicate these health disparities to those who need it the most. We're currently planning stakeholder engagements this summer to inform how we can best assist states, tribes, and public preschools, local educational agencies. And we're going to issue a competitive grant solicitation targeted for this fall, late this fall, that meets the needs of the impacted community. So we want to do a little bit more homework up front, make sure that the impacted community has what it needs in terms of communication, and then put that grant process out there.
Great, and I hope you'll also replicate your emphasis on simplicity. So many of the small communities, do not have grant writers. They find that the process is so complicated that they give up and don't apply in the first place. And my team tries to assist them and guide them how they can effectively apply, but we want to make sure that small communities and small counties with limited staff are able to apply effectively.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we've really focused on with our core budget and in the flexibility with the bipartisan infrastructure law, EPA providing technical assistance, and that's where you see us asking for additional resources in our regional offices. We know these communities don't have the technical capacity, and there are many aspects of that I've quite frankly wanted to replicate, and spending time with Tom Vilsack and USDA. Having people on the ground to provide that technical assistance is invaluable.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, I might commend to you and your team to do a check-in with the school district in Tok, Alaska. They have been engaged in a pilot of an EV school bus up there, how these buses, or how this bus operates in extreme cold weather environments. I'm not going to comment on the success or lack of success, but just to recognize that there are some considerations, and I think we can learn something from what they're doing up there. I want to direct my first questions to you regarding waters of the United States. And as I mentioned in my opening, there is perhaps different impact to a state like Alaska, where a significant portion of our state is considered to be wetlands. So it kind of puts us in a different place than most other states, and it impacts economic development, particularly in our rural communities that are trying to do very small, perhaps very routine projects and get stopped after this. So this was, again, a good roundtable that the Assistant Administrator Fox was able to engage in. And so I'd like you to share with me this morning how you plan to integrate the feedback that was heard at that roundtable from Alaska constituencies, and more specifically to the issue of compensatory mitigation. One of the challenges that we have with compensatory mitigation in the state is that we don't have areas that are in need of mitigation. For us, we may need some more creative solutions, allowing the agency to explore whether it's projects like water infrastructure projects that are desperately needed in rural Alaska and Alaska Native villages that will improve water quality, just improve life there. So what are you planning to do with the feedback that you've received, and are you considering these beneficial proposals in lieu of what would be determined more typical compensatory mitigation?
Well, thank you for that question. I can tell you that we were very thoughtful in these regional roundtables, and we chose 10 regions that we believe would be more reflective of the diversity across the country. Assistant Administrator Fox came back with a lot of great intelligence. We are definitely not just checking boxes or going through the motions. These roundtables are very instructive for us and will inform how we approach waters of the U.S. As a former state regulator, I know the difficulties of ambiguity. I also understand the frustrations of an overly complex and administratively burdensome rule that doesn't necessarily reflect the needs of North Carolina or Alaska, but maybe advantages a state like Florida. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to strike a balance where we meet our legal obligations under the Clean Water Act as a federal agency and a federal government, but also provide the flexibility and autonomy that we know states need to handle some of the conditions that are on the ground. And so that is the goal we're trying to achieve. I believe that when you look at the current proposed rule, it goes back to 2015, which was, in my opinion, a simpler rule prior to some of the changes that were enacted. It will codify some of the decisions that the Supreme Court has made, but it will retain a lot of the exemptions and the exclusions that we know our farmers and ranchers in states like Alaska will need. And then we're going to add into that these comments that we're getting from these regional roundtables. So we're trying to strike a balance where we get a legally sound, durable rule that gives states the flexibility to do some of the more innovative things that I think Assistant Administrator Fox heard during the regional roundtable, especially in the compensatory mitigation and other categories as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear you use the word flexibility. Again, this is not an effort to get around a rule. This is just a reality that we don't have a system that accommodates what compensatory mitigation might look like in other parts of the country. And yet you have extreme need when it comes to certain aspects of water quality, water safety. And so just your commitment to keep working on this to ensure that the state's input is considered is appreciated. Absolutely. Let me switch to the contaminated lands. And again, you've heard me express my concerns and how critical an issue this is and how unacceptable it really is that so little progress has been made to date by the federal government. We have to do better on this. We must do better on this. And again, I want to make sure I'm not blaming your agency. I'm not blaming the EPA. But I do think that EPA is uniquely positioned to help us find a real, and to use your word, a durable solution to this problem that has plagued these communities in Alaska for so long. So thank you for your willingness to engage on this. I appreciate what you've done so far. But we're here in the committee now, we're talking about providing resources and to help drive new initiatives within the agency. So I would ask for your commitment today to have our two staffs sit down together by the end of this month and begin to explore some creative solutions to this problem.
You absolutely have my commitment there, and I think your staff will find that the Acting Assistant Administrator Carlton Waterhouse, who grew up and spent some time in Alaska, who is leading our Superfund and Brownfield efforts, has some really innovative ideas about how we can approach this problem, and he's been doing a great job conversing with DOI, DOD, DOE, NOAA. So we've got some ideas. We need the resources. We need to start putting shoulder to this wheel. And you have my commitment. You also have Carlton's commitment to focus on the unique issues that are facing the Alaska Natives.
Well, I appreciate that. And you're right. We need to resource it. We just can't talk about it. We've been talking about it for too long, and the result has been the same, which is nothing. So I appreciate this willingness to work together, and I look forward to what we're going to do to change this dynamic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member. Administrator Regan, thanks for being here. I want to start out parochial. Last week, I talked to you about getting people on the ground at Columbia Falls to talk about the issue that they have. My staff tells me that they were there yesterday. Is that accurate?
It is, yes.
Okay, so the Superfund process tends to be a little bit, we'll call it clunky. There's probably a better word for it than that, but it's pretty complicated. Are there plans to ensure that the public has an opportunity to give input on any potential solution? And are there plans to for the people to be able to give input after the remediation plan goes public, both pre and post?
Absolutely. This is an area where we number one, we believe in community engagement.
Okay.
To your point, this is especially important. So we did have a meeting just yesterday, and I think the report back to me was it was a great meeting. We're also planning monthly activities with the community leading up to any release of any proposed plan. So we want to be sure the community has active opportunities to contribute to the process.
I appreciate that and look forward to making sure that that does happen because it is critically important. Now I want to talk about waste in place. We got a number of places in Montana, you know this, Butte, Smurfit-Stone, potentially Columbia Falls, where waste in place is used. Let's stick with Columbia Falls. We could go to any one of them. Smurfit-Stone's the same kind of thing. We've got an area of land that has been contaminated, that is next to the Flathead River, that flows into Flathead Lake, that is at the headwaters of water that impacts the entire West. Okay, if it's waste in place, the question becomes, why do we even do that? Number one. Number two, is there adequate testing that can be done to make sure that this stuff isn't leaching? Because the reason it was brought to the attention of the EPA to begin with is because common sense would tell you this stuff's going to leach into a river that runs right through it. And so the question is that when it comes to waste in place, do you have accurate or adequate testing regime to be able to make the determination whether it's actually the right thing to do?
We do. Under the Superfund program and the Circular program, we have in place the abilities to do a thorough scientific evaluation, and we also have the methodologies in place to do the appropriate monitoring if waste in place is the proposed option.
So if waste in place is a proposed option, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't matter where it is. We've got the same kind of situation on Smurfit that is going to be dealt with. Can that area ever be developed?
I'd have to circle back with the experts to determine, number one, what the cleanup levels would be around there, and two, what the developmental opportunities would be at the point of the closure and the securing of it and any kind of future economic development opportunities.
So, because the reason I say that is because when I was in Columbia Falls in particular, but it's the same thing with any of these. These places are pretty landlocked. I mean, they're in the middle of mountains, and they got water running. And this area had been industrial. And I think the hope that I had, the community could have a different hope, and I would absolutely yield to them on their opinion. But the hope that I had is that it would be cleaned up to a point where it could be developed. Mm-hmm. And it would be cleaned up to the point where we didn't have to worry about a river that's at the headwaters would pollute one of the largest lakes in the West and everything downstream from it.
Yes. Well, I can assure you that any remedy chosen is to protect public health, first and foremost, as well as the environment. I will circle back with you on the answer of future economic development opportunities, but I can tell you we thoroughly look at what's most protective. Disturbing, trying to move and excavate and transport radioactive materials, or looking at a way we can contain it to be most protective of public health and the environment. So I'll circle back with you on the future development pieces, but I can assure you it's designed to protect public health.
Okay, that's good, because last time I checked, as my Native American friends would say, water literally is life. You can live without a lot of things. You can't live without clean water.
I agree.
I want to thank you and your staff for your work on the Kootenai. As you well know, this is an impaired watershed with selenium flowing into the United States from Canada. I've been trying to get attention to this issue for some time, and your regional staff have been very helpful in organizing a multi-agency response. I am frustrated that negotiations with Canada seem to have stalled again, but I want to make sure that you have the resources and staff that you need to support the State Department in those conversations and from the International Joint Commission in depth if we ever get to a reference. Is there anything we can do to help you with the fight?
I think the support that you've given, I greatly appreciated, and we are positioned very well to support the State Department. This has been a priority for me. As you know, I've also sent the word directly to my counterpart in Canada through our international bilaterals as well. And so we hope to get it unstuck and continue to make progress.
So, and this isn't in your bailiwick, but it certainly is in State Departments. I mean, Canada is a huge friend of ours, a great trading partner. And the fact is that there's water that flows from the United States north. We shouldn't be polluting them, and they shouldn't be polluting us. And that's really the bottom line. I want to talk very, very briefly in the next 40 seconds about what we're doing in the area of climate change. Now, we've got gasoline, diesel prices, $5.50 a gallon. Last week I had one of these hearings. It was $5.44. It's $5.50 this week. Who God knows what it's going to be next week. And I think this is a real opportunity to get more energy into the marketplace. And I would encourage you, as we talk about batteries and buses, which is important, but let's get it so we can have batteries in cars that go more than 350 miles. Let's get it in over-the-road semis that emit a lot. Let's get it in my field tractor. Yeah. Let's get that battery technology. I think the motor technology is there. The battery technology is not. So I would encourage you to do what we can do to get that and get it affordable. If it's affordable and if it's in the marketplace, people will change overnight, and we don't have to give subsidies for it. And so I would just encourage you to try to push that envelope as much as possible. I like tax incentives. They're great, but they don't fix the problem. If we have affordable battery technology, that fixes the problem.
I agree, and I can tell you I've spent time with the executives and the CEOs and presidents of Mack Truck, Volvo, and others. The technology is there. It's on the horizon. We're looking at the cost effectiveness of it. But when we look at our heavy-duty vehicles rules, stages 1 and 2, we are just as focused on our longer-range vehicles and our trucks as we are on our light-duty vehicles as well. So I agree with you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Regan, for being here today. And you know exactly what I'm going to talk about because it is one of my very top concerns as being the senator from Mississippi and always has been since the day I got here, the Yazoo Backwater Area Pump Project. And, you know, it's a concern to me, but it's definitely a concern to the Mississippi Delta. The November 17th, 2021 letter from the EPA Office of Water, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, brought this long overdue congressionally authorized flood control project to a screeching halt, leaving thousands of Mississippians without hope of decent flood control and more than $10 million in taxpayer money totally just flushed down the drain. Mr. Administrator, I cannot begin to express my frustration and disappointment by your agency's decisions, which was, by all accounts, an abuse of the EPA's authority under the Clean Water Act. And to my colleagues on this committee, this may be a Mississippi issue today, but make no mistake, the same abuse of authority may end up in your backyard tomorrow. Mr. Administrator, you and other administration officials, including the White House Council on Environmental Quality, profess that the Yazoo backwater pumps are a priority and that you're actively looking for a solution. And talk about an environmental injustice. This is a true minority community who live in true poverty. They cannot afford homeowners insurance. And you heard a testimony, I think, of Mr. Anderson Jones that talked about an elderly man that talked about his senior class party that he went to with mud on his pants because he had to wade through the water. And he said, my grandchildren are wading through those same waters. I will never forget that man's testimony. What is the status of that process, and are you involving local stakeholders? Are the congressionally authorized pumps an option under this administration, and if not, why not?
Well, thank you for that question, and also thank you and the delegation for the invitation to host me in Mississippi and Vicksburg and actually see it firsthand. That was really helpful. You know, I am going to stay with my commitment to you, which is this process is a priority. I think what I agreed to, and we are meeting that obligation, is I pull the White House in. I think there's been a Number one, this issue has been there for decades. We can agree that it's not political because I think it was the Bush administration that put the veto in place and the Trump administration that had a process that was deemed political interference to change the Bush administration's decision on this project. But that aside, I have asked the White House, the Council for Environmental Quality, to convene all of the federal agencies that are involved, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Army, USDA, and FEMA, to focus on this project. And we have done just that. We've got technical experts from all of those agencies reviewing all of the available data. There are no options off the table. To your question, green and gray, hard and natural infrastructure solutions are on the table. What I can say is our teams have started meeting, and there are weekly 2-hour meetings occurring over the next month to put solutions in front of both leadership at EPA and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we're tracking on that timeline that I committed to you on. We've got all of the agencies. We have an interagency council actually focused on this problem. I committed to you and Senator Wicker that instead of continuing to kick the football down the road like we've seen for the past 20, 30 years, we're going to get a solution to this problem.
During all these meetings and all these hearings that you're having and all the agencies that you say you're bringing in, it should be very clear that the letter that was sent, that the pump project is subject to EPA's 2008 veto of a different Corps plan. You should easily find that. According to the EPA Assistant Administrator of the Office of Water, the 2020 proposed plan is the same plan proposed by the Corps in 2007. The 2020 proposed plan would discharge fill material into the same disposal site prohibited under EPA's 2008 veto. This is just not true. The facts are the proposed location of the pump station in the new 2020 plan is in a completely different county than the 2007 plan's project site. That's a big difference. And when I got that and I saw that you were looking at the things in 2007 in a completely different county, I was just totally amazed. Another fact, the 2020 plan included in the new mitigation features that to help sustain aquatic habitat, fisheries, and mussels during low flow season. The 2007 plan called for nothing of that sort. That is a big difference. Another fact, the 2020 plan included an adaptive management plan in light of the uncertainty related to the effects of pumping out surface water within that area and to allow the flexible decisions making when operational adjustments are needed. The 2007 plan did not include any of that. So this is a big difference, and the list goes on. The bottom line is the 2020 plan is not the 2007 plan. Given the long list of differences detailed in the Corps' final supplemental environmental impact statement, how can your agency determine that these two plans are basically one and the same?
I think that the experts. I think we can agree that this issue has been going on since 1940 or 50, and EPA and Army Corps and Fish and Wildlife. These agencies have been having this discussion for 50 years and placing the blame in different categories.
But it's time to straighten it out.
It is, which is why I am proud to say that for the first time in 50 or 60 years, I got the White House to convene an interagency council to pull all these agencies together so that staff can't hide, people can't hide. We're going to take a look, we're going to do the analysis, and we're going to come up with a solution. And I feel very good about the process that we have underway because it's never been done before. And what you're going to find with the proposed solutions is for the first time in decades, you're going to see a U.S. EPA, a USDA, you're going to see an Army Corps and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife in the same administration stop bickering and agree on what we believe to be a legally sound and engineering durable solution to the Yazoo pump issue. The other thing that we're going to also do, because you raised environmental justice, is Army Corps' evaluation of the Yazoo pumps project has never done an evaluation on EJ, never provided any data to support that. We're going to do that this time around. So we want to button this thing up. I want to button this thing up, probably not as much as you do, but I want to button this thing up because it's the right thing to do, and I believe we can get it done.
Well, if you look at the facts and the science, you can get it done. And I'm just asking that all of this is cleared up because this is information coming from your office that needs to be cleared up. And I truly appreciate you trying to find this solution. And it's been a long time coming, and I just hope that this is a quick resolution to this and that it's not 2 or 3 more years down the road, because these people in the Mississippi Delta need your help, and it did come to a screeching halt after it was congressionally approved. So I think you've got a lot of explaining to do. I think you've got a lot of corrections to make, and I truly appreciate your efforts in this.
Well, thank you, and I agree with you. 50, 60, 40 years, however many years is way too long, and this is a priority for me, and we want to find a solution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Good to see you again, and I look forward to our visit together to West Virginia in June, and thank you for agreeing to do that. I appreciate that. I'm going to follow up on a topic we've talked about, I think it's about 13 months now, and that is the EPA's involvement in developing the U.S. nationally determined contribution target. Since you testified in April, we did receive some documents, and thank you for that. So your staff had also agreed to schedule a briefing, so that has not been scheduled yet. So I'm asking you to please have that briefing scheduled as soon as we can with my staff.
Okay. And is that briefing
on the materials that were submitted?
Okay.
The other question on those materials, there was information that I think there was a feeling that maybe not all of the information was brought forward. You had previously said that EPA provided qualitative information about our regulatory and voluntary programs and discussed approaches to quantitative analysis. So in the materials, we didn't see any of that quantitative analysis, and I'm wondering, did we get all the materials? I mean, are you satisfied that you've presented all the materials to our staff that we had been requesting?
I am. I posed this question just yesterday, and my
you knew
staff,
you'd see me, right?
my staff knows how serious I am about being responsive to your request, and so to the best of my knowledge, you all have all of the materials that we have.
Okay, then I look forward to the briefing. I think that will help us understand more some of the data. I think there was some questions as to how the data was presented. Okay. I did ask you, and this is a question, and there's been a couple articles about, you're asking for 1,000 more employees in this budget. How many people are presently full-time at EPA?
We have, let me get you an accurate number here. We have right now about 14,824 employees.
Okay. Okay, so the 1,000 would take you up to 16,200, so you're not even at your full capacity right now.
Yes, our FY23 budget request would support right around 16,000.
Right, so you're still shy. You're still not hiring in to the max that you have from last year quite yet. You must not be, because 1,000 would be 15,200. So
yes,
you're
we're still hiring.
600 people shy of your max. Are all of those people back in the office and working post-pandemic?
Yes, our return to work strategy was, it began February 28th. Our political appointees and senior agency leadership returned. Beginning March 28th, our managers and our non-bargaining staff returned. So we worked extensively with our unions, still working with our unions, but, we are, in the coming weeks, all of our EPA employees will be fully phased into what we're calling our new schedules.
Yeah, and your new schedule, for some people, includes fully remote work, right?
Yes.
According to an article,
Yes.
that I read. And then also coming in one day every 2 weeks, another.
Yes, we have a range.
So this
of
is not
flexibilities.
actually everybody coming in. It can be a blended system, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I had a meeting yesterday with some energy folks, and you've been in your confirmation, and I think every time you've been in front of all of our committees, and I think you've exhibited this in certain instances. You've pledged to have all stakeholder involvement, to listen to everybody before making a decision, knowing that you're not going to please everybody in the room. And there was a general feeling within, this is related to pipelines and natural gas development, that they have made numerous requests to EPA to be a stakeholder, to have their positions heard. I think we all see what's happening in Europe. We know that the reliance on our own energy resources and an all of the above energy plan, and we're feeling, I think most of us in energy states feeling as though that's not really moving forward through the administration with some of the pipelines that have been canceled. I have an MVP pipeline in West Virginia that has had some huge difficulties, even though it's 95% complete. I just want to ask for your pledge again that folks in the energy industry have an ability to come knock on your door and actually have their side of the story heard. I think they're doing a lot to reduce their emissions, and have on the methane side and other side. I know you're getting ready to do a methane rule. I sense some frustration with them. Do you publish who you meet with, and have you had meetings with folks in that industry around the methane rule?
Yes, we're fully transparent with who I meet with and who staff meets with. And yes, I've met with leadership from the power sector, the oil and gas sector. I was down in Houston at a CIRA conference meeting with executives around all of the potential for methane capture and the like. And so if there is a frustration, I'd love to get that from you and your staff, but it's my understanding and personal experience that we are meeting with all of our stakeholders.
Well, I'll circle back with them and make sure that that's that your door is open and that
Yes.
you're willing to meet with them. Maybe it's just not this particular, these were a whole variety of different people, and I was sort of frustrated by that. On the Justice 40 issue, I've tried to dig deep into that to see. It's pledged that 40% of the funding that is going to go to justice communities. Are you quantifying that? I mean, is there a website that we can go to that's going to show me where and how this pledge of 40% is actually being translated into different communities in Alaska or West Virginia or Mississippi?
Yeah, I think that, so the Justice 40 initiative obviously is being quarterbacked out of the White House. And
So who would we go to at the White House?
The Center for Environmental Quality, Brenda Mallory's
Right.
shop.
Okay.
And as agencies, we're all participating in pilot projects to demonstrate how to do this. So let me give you a couple examples. With the bipartisan infrastructure law, the $5 billion for Superfund brownfields, as we put that money out, we've got more than 50 or 60%, I'll get you the right number, that goes to disadvantaged communities. When we look at our...
Are you using the screening tool that the CEQ put together?
No, we have our own screening tool.
Is it different than CEQ?
I think that there are some differences, and EPA's had an environmental justice screening tool for decades. We've also are very well versed in environmental justice. We're one of the agencies that's been doing this for a number of years, and some of this is actually built into our programs. Like with the state revolving loan funds, 49% of our dollars have to go to disadvantaged communities. So EPA has some built-in infrastructure that really does a good evaluation of where our resources actually go. So we are using ourselves as pilot projects for the Justice 40 initiative as some of that's been built out.
And then you feed that up to CEQ.
That's right.
Are you satisfied you're reaching the 40%?
I'm very satisfied with the focus that my agency has given to environmental justice and equity issues. And when I look across my programs, numbers matter to me, data matters, fairness and equity and transparency matters. With our state revolving loan fund program, with our brownfields and Superfund, we're doing an excellent job making sure that the people that need these resources the most are actually getting the resources.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Administrator. Good to see you. I'm looking forward to hosting Deputy Administrator McCabe and our new Region 1 Administrator David Cash from Rhode Island to celebrate the success of the Southern New England program, or the SNEP program as we call it. had the privilege to work as chairman of the subcommittee, along with my ranking member, Senator Murkowski, to create the SNP program. Thank you, Lisa. And it is doing a lot of great work in southern New England, the estuaries in Narragansett Bay, and all throughout Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Can you speak to the importance of these geographic programs in terms of your overall mission?
Oh, well, listen, they're national treasures, they're invaluable, and we're thankful to Congress for the resources that we received in the 2022 budget to help accentuate the value there, not just from an ecosystems protection standpoint, but that many of these geographic programs provide drinking water for so many millions of Americans. The $15 million in the bipartisan infrastructure law, specifically for the Southern New England program, will definitely surge the efforts to protect water quality and ecological health for diverse habitats. But, you know, I think that the program, this specific program, ensures that the strategies that we're putting in place are comprehensive, durable, and sustainable. So the short answer is invaluable. We have it as a high priority. The budget reflects that priority, and we're doing the most with the resources that we're applying to those areas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Administrator. One of the aspects why this program is so important is that the Narragansett watershed, actually, most of it's in Massachusetts. So Narragansett Bay is in Rhode Island. So if we get funding for Narragansett Bay, that's nice. But if we're not dealing with the source of pollution in Massachusetts and elsewhere, and this program's flexibility, giving the regional director the ability to fund projects in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, that ultimately enhance the quality of the Narragansett Bay is just first rate. So thank you for your support. Environmental justice is a critical issue. In this pandemic, we saw the impacts dramatically of the disparities between racial and ethnic groups in terms of so many different programs. And environmental equality is one of those programs. I was pleased to see the President included in the 23 budget EPA's State Environmental Justice Cooperative Agreement Program. And my Department of Environmental Management, is working to set up its own justice program. Can you talk about how you're going to help develop these local environmental justice programs?
Absolutely, and I believe it's critical that they are developed at the local levels, and I believe it's critical that the communities are involved. And I thank you for your leadership in this space and what Rhode Island's doing. We're excited about what Rhode Island's doing. I know my team has recently connected with your staff to think through how to stand this up, and we want to be sure that that the state is aware of the Environmental Justice Cooperative Agreement Grant Program, because we believe it will be instrumental in not only setting up the program in Rhode Island, but pulling some of the best management practices from programs that we've seen all across the country. And so we're excited, we're engaged, and if there's anything that we can do to help with that success, we stand ready.
Well, thank you. I'm going to sort of put on my hat as Services Committee member and ask you about cybersecurity challenges in your department. Unfortunately, no area of life today is immune from cybersecurity, and that's something that is sensitivity in national security agencies, but I don't know if it's the same sensitivity in quote-unquote domestic agencies. But can you just comment from your perspective as your cybersecurity issues?
There are. We're laser focused on this. This has been a high priority for me since becoming administrator, because as a state regulator, I recognized the vulnerabilities when I was director in North Carolina. 180,000, I believe, independent water systems in this country. Most states don't really have a good understanding of the cyber protective measures that are in place and how vulnerable they are. Yeah. And so, yes, in this budget, we're requesting $15.5 million for EPA's activities to help enhance the state's cybersecurity. $25 million to create a new grant program that helps water systems establish and build necessary capabilities. $35 million for technical assistance, and then $50 million to support a new grant program for the resilience and sustainability of public water systems serving more than 10,000 people. This is a priority for us, and we're laser focused on it.
Well, I appreciate it, because there are we have in Rhode Island a major water system, the Providence water system, which through the foresight of my ancestors many, many years ago, they bought a large part of Scituate, which is a community to the west, and they're supplying most of the state. But we have small systems that are being operated by 3 or 4 people, and they do not have the sophistication to deal with any type of cyber attack. So I think this is a good start, but we have to be able to reach down to the lowest, the smallest areas, and also don't assume that the big water systems know what they're doing either. This is rather novel for these types of organizations. But thank you very much for your great work, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley and Ranking Member Mikowski. It's good to be with you today. Administrator Regan, good to see you as well. First, I want to talk a bit about the proposed environmental management disposal facility. We call it the EMDF at Oak Ridge in my home state of Tennessee. DOE is cleaning up legacy waste and buildings from the Manhattan Project era in the Cold War. The cleanup has been a success story so far. For the first time in history, the United States has cleaned up a former uranium enrichment complex. It's done so 4 years early and under budget. I'm sure my colleagues here are pleased to hear that. It's made more land available for economic development, and like you, I served in my home state cabinet. We're excited about the potential this creates from an economic development perspective, and it gives us an opportunity to reuse some previously contaminated land for other DOE purposes as well. One of the concerns about this, though, is that the current on-site disposal facility will be full by 2028. And that threatens to delay cleanup, leave contaminated buildings on site. It could cost hundreds of jobs and waste, again, millions of taxpayer dollars. For over a decade, the state of Tennessee, the Department of Energy, and the EPA have been discussing approval of a second disposal site. And the process has been transparent. It's been rigorously reviewed, I must say. It's been open to public comment. And I was very pleased to hear that on May 4th, the DOE, the EPA, and the state of Tennessee reached an agreement on site groundwater study, waste acceptance criteria, and protection of water quality in Bear Creek in this area. DOE is currently hosting a 30-day public engagement period, and just last night, DOD hosted a public meeting in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to discuss this facility. I want to particularly call out and commend one of your member of your team, Jeff Prieto, your general counsel, who's done an excellent job. He and I talked about this before his confirmation. He stayed in touch with me. I appreciate him working with me on this issue to get us to this point. So, Administrator Regan, on June the 7th, next month, when the 30-day comment period closes, what will the next steps be for your agency to get through the process and sign a record of decision?
Well, and Senator, thank you for that. I think our staffs are very proud that we are on time, under budget, and making some headway here. What I'll do is I'll circle back with you and your team on what those exact next steps are, because I don't have that right here at my fingertips.
Understood. My main goal is to see that there just be no further delays in the process, that we get it done, get it approved, get the record of decision in place. There are substantial risk of cost overruns associated with this. If we don't get the agreement in place now, the timeline's going to get pushed, and we're going to have a real problem in terms of running out of storage space there. So
I hear you loud and clear.
I appreciate your personal attention to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Administrator. I'd like to turn now to another topic that impacts our nation's gas prices and capacity, and that's the topic of small refinery exemptions. I'm sure you're well familiar with this. Prices at the pump are at record highs. Americans are feeling a lot of pain right now, and there doesn't seem to be major relief in sight. However, your agency continues to move forward with attacking small refineries by denying all petitions for small refinery exemptions from the renewable fuel standard. My understanding is that the EPA has already issued 31 retroactive denials for petitions that were awarded in 2019 that covered the 2018 compliance years, and industry anticipates that you'll deny all 60-plus SRE petitions that are pending for 2019, 2020, and the 2021 compliance years. I just want to ask Administrator Regan, is that accurate?
We have made the first tranche of decisions because of a court order deadline, and the second tranche of decisions have not been made yet. What I will say is I think that the 10th Circuit's decision really informed how the agency should approach these SREs. And what we've tried to do also, in addition to the SRE issue, is not necessarily have it in isolation, but in the context of thinking about how we look at refineries and biofuels and RVOs and just getting that program on a much stronger footing. So what I can commit to you is that we are looking for a way to provide certainty to both the ag industry and the refining industry in terms of those obligations under the RVO program and how that plays into these exemptions, these exemption decisions that the agency's having to make.
One thing I want to point out is that how these decisions unfold will have a real impact on compliance cost. And compliance costs, particularly with respect to these exemptions that we're talking about, have grown, my understanding, is 69% since the EPA published its December 7th proposal to eliminate small refinery exemptions. That moves what was a 13-cent per gallon compliance cost up to 22 cents per gallon. And if all of these further exemptions are denied, that will take that compliance cost even further.
Yeah, I think we'd have to sort of look at those sort of site by site, because when you take a look at the exemptions that were not recently granted, there's also compliance flexibility built into that. So it ranges from, some decisions have been made in the past so far back that some of that compliance was forgiven. There's also some that were made more recent that have payment plans or compliance plans put in place in a phased way. So it wasn't a blanket denial, you're on your own. I think that was carefully thought through, and there were very serious considerations given to those who we felt did not deserve the compliance, even though decisions were made years past, and we're making this decision today. We thought we did it with thought and care.
So you've got an easy payment plan, so to speak, when you've come back and denied retroactively.
Yes, there's a payment plan that's been built into those decisions that were made most recently. I can't speak to the decisions that haven't been made yet, but when you look back at the ones that were denied, you can look back at different flexibilities built in for repayment.
I understand the concept here. I would just encourage you strongly, given the fact that we are hitting record high gas prices at the pump every day. Families are having to make decisions between groceries that they buy or filling up their tank. And anything that would increase compliance cost, I think we should look at very carefully right now. And having blanket exceptions, retroactive withdrawals of exemptions, I think, obviously puts upward pressure on prices when you have an opportunity right before you to put downward pressure by granting the exemptions. So I'm going to encourage you, please, to consider reversing course here in this blanket exemption denial, and please take into account the impact on hardworking families that are trying to make things work at home, at the pump. Not doing it, I think, implicates not only the economics of an American family, making it harder for them to get by. It has upward pressure on inflation. It also impacts our national security. And all of this, I think, is something that is extremely challenging in my mind to understand why we would be pursuing a policy like this at this point in time, when we see the type of inflation and energy costs that we've got. I'm also concerned about the way the policy is being done in terms of being implemented through guidance rather than going through a more formal rulemaking process that would actually subject it to congressional review, because I can tell you that we'd like to have the opportunity to review this. It feels like a policy change to me, and particularly given the economic implications on the American consumer, it's significant. So, again, I would encourage you to take a very strong look at that and reconsider.
And I appreciate that, and we are, I understand that people are hurting. The price at the pump is really putting pressure on all of our fellow citizens because of this unprovoked war, and I will say that we are very thoughtful about that.
Well, to clarify, this started well before the unprovoked war.
Well, on
the war may be
SREs,
exacerbating it, but these decisions don't have anything to do with the war in Ukraine.
I think that the prices that we're looking at now, and then some of the pressure that the refineries are facing, this war doesn't help. And these SRE decisions that, quite frankly, I don't enjoy making, but have been forced to make because during the previous administration gave these exemptions out in a way that the 10th Circuit Court disagreed with, and so they were remanded back. The decisions that we're making in terms of these SREs, we're trying to do it in a way where we follow the law. And I'm trying to stay on the right side of the law while also doing exactly what you just laid out, which is being sensitive to the prices that we're facing now and how we can do that to alleviate the burdens of just average everyday
I
citizens.
appreciate your sensitivity to that, Administrator, and I would encourage you then to put it through a formal rulemaking so we can have proper notice and comment and proper review by this body. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. I'm going to try to get through a bunch of questions quickly. And first, in terms of water infrastructure for tribes, I'm particularly concerned about the situation faced by the Warm Springs in Oregon, who have a myriad of problems with their water system. And the Indian Health Service is using the bipartisan infrastructure bill to tackle that to a degree, but some of the issues are ineligible for funding through that mechanism, including the water system that supplies hospital and schools to the drinking water system. Do you have a sense of how the funding that comes through your side of the world might be able to help in that situation?
You know, we are very in tune with this issue and will absolutely continue to work with the Indian Health Services, and we'll keep you and your staff in the loop. I would say that, you know, EPA's experts have met with the Indian Health Service to explore some flexibilities and innovation here. We don't have the funding or the authority to directly support operation, maintenance, and repair, but that hasn't prevented us from continuing the conversation to think about where and how EPA can weigh in on this very important issue.
Well, I like the terms innovation and flexibility, so let's brainstorm on how to get this done so that we have a complete water system in that situation. And in fiscal year 2022, we had a number of water infrastructure challenges that were addressed through what I call community-initiated projects. Here in D.C., they're called congressionally directed, which makes no sense to me because this is all about the communities initiating ideas, and then we fight for our communities to get those things funded. And they're very happy when we fight for them and are able to assist them with the priorities that they see on the ground. But when are those grants going to start actually going out the door?
I believe we have about 483 congressionally directed projects totaling about $841 million. We're committed to a timely and transparent process, but to be perfectly honest, it's the implementation of what we consider to be a new program. The magnitude is great, and while the 2022 appropriations gave resources for the projects, it did not provide dedicated administrative funding to support the implementation. So we're trying to stand that up as quickly as possible, and we're working on that final process. I believe, if my information is correct, fall of 2022, I believe, is our targeted time frame there.
Well, let me explain something that you probably have realized. There's 100 senators who have communities that have received grants, and they're very excited about the grants, but they're very concerned about costs going up while they're waiting. They're like, okay, we submitted a proposal, we were awarded a grant, why can't we get the check? I'd like you to brainstorm with your inner circle on realizing that these communities will be really well served by finding a way to expedite that process. Because I'm sure you don't want 100 senators calling you up and saying, my community just found out their costs doubled because the grants haven't come yet.
I agree with that 100%.
All right. I'm sure you don't want those phone calls. All right. So I want to turn to the issue of plastics. You can't hardly pick up any kind of newspaper that doesn't talk about the expanding problems with microplastics, the problems with plastics being swept out to sea. You know, in the past, all the mantra was the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and we all look at those little triangles, and we sit there and we go, can this piece of plastic that was on top of my coffee cup be recycled when it has coffee on it? And there's a whole lot of wish cycling where you put things into a recycling bin, but they're not actually getting recycled. And a lot of those plastics that have those triangles with those numbers on them, there's not even a market. There's not even, nothing is happening with them. We're just deceiving the American public about it. In fact, recycling has dropped from 8% to 6% over this last year. So it's not working. What really happens with plastics is not the 3 R's, but it's the 3 B's. They're burned, they're buried, or they're borne out to sea. And now, because of the microplastics, every American is consuming, it's estimated, about a credit card worth of plastic a week. And this, there's a lot of chemicals in those plastics, hormone disruptors, so on and so forth. This can't be good for our children. It can't be good for anybody. And we need to radically improve plastics. How are you going to make that happen?
Well, I can tell you that this was a surprise to me, but in my conversations, especially with young people in this country, the very number one issue is climate change, but a close second is plastics. And this is something that and recycling, something that EPA is really focused on. We're in the process of developing a national strategy to reduce plastics and other waste in waterways and oceans, which identifies key actions that are needed to reduce and collect plastic waste material. And these are strategies that are part of a series of strategies on building a circular economy for all that we believe will fulfill the mandate for strategy under our Save Our Seas Act 2.0. And so that's where we're focusing most of our time, efforts, and resources, and we believe that will contribute to the solution that you're looking for.
Yeah, well, here is my impression. There's a whole lot of nice-sounding language regarding reducing waste and improving recycling and a circular economy, but a whole lot of inaction in actually delivering changes. When we grab our coffee and we get a plastic cap on it, why is that necessary? Why can't it be done in some other fashion? I mean, you've got research teams, you've got experts. We need a dramatically improved plan, not just simply a new version of a recycling strategy that fails for a whole host of very understandable reasons. So I'm going to really push the agency to say this is a huge, huge issue. And a failure on this is a massive failure for the American people. I'll keep pressing for a really dramatic, significant set of solutions to be proposed and implemented by the agency.
That's absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the chairman's comments about plastics, as you well know, we have challenges in Alaska with recycling efforts, just limited capacity. Most of our recycled product is shipped outside, probably down to Senator Merkley's state in Oregon.
We're happy for you to keep that up there in Alaska. Thank you very much.
Well, we're trying to get it out and get it to a place where it can be recycled. But the marine debris that we deal with that just comes to our shoreline as a result of the currents, it's just, we may be doing a good job of keeping our state clean, but it gets delivered on our beaches, it gets delivered on our coastline, and so it's costly to remove it, and of course the longer that it stays there in the tidal zone, the more the debris deteriorates into microplastics, the more challenging it is on a host of different levels. So the agency, I think, is rightly looking at what more we need to be doing. I was pleased to see that a Phase 2 Small Business Innovation Research Grant was provided to an Alaska constituent who has a pretty innovative way of recycling plastic ocean waste. So we're encouraged by levels of innovation like that. But as you are looking to expand grants for recycling efforts, I'm hoping that you're also going to be considering and seeking funding for marine debris and plastic ocean waste collection and recycling efforts as well as that, as well as what you've just discussed with the chairman.
Okay.
So I mentioned PFAS. Again, this is a big issue for us in Alaska, but I know that it is a priority for others on the committee and here in Congress. In my state, the list of communities that is facing the challenges of PFAS and PFAS contamination is only growing. As you know, we had $10 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law that is going to be helpful, but we've got to start making meaningful impact on PFAS contamination while we wait for federal standards. And I think the infrastructure bill is a good first step on that. So can you walk the committee through how you envision this $10 billion from that law making a difference on PFAS, and how the agency is working with states, working with our local communities to perhaps provide some best practices on how to spend these funds on remediation of PFAS?
Absolutely. This is a top priority for the administration, and so we've got a couple of tracks going, but we do have this PFAS strategy. For the $10 billion, most of these funds are being pushed through to the states, being provided as fully forgivable loans or grants without a state match required. So that's going to help us get the resources to the communities that need them the most in terms of putting some protective measures in place. We're also working on guidance for the proper destruction and disposal of PFAS. So we want to be able to not only give these communities resources to handle the products, but we want to be able to give the right guidance as well.
So are you working with the Department of Defense on that in terms of the proper destruction of PFAS?
We're on track to update our guidance on that. And yes, we are working with the Department of Defense. We're working with HHS. We're working in an interagency capacity to be sure that we're all focused on solving the same problem.
Okay, all right. Well, sooner is better than later, but I think you agree with that, and I appreciate that the administration is placing a priority on it. PM 2.5, we can't have a hearing on EPA's budget without talking about fine particulate matter. This is an ongoing issue, of course, in primarily the Fairbanks North Star Borough. I just wanted to check in with you on the current status of the PM 2.5 standards. In June of last year, you announced that you were going to re-examine the previous administration's decision in 2020 to retain the existing particulate matter national ambient air quality standards. So can you give me an update on the agency's review, and if you've made a decision to revise the 2020 rule, and if so, what the timeline is for a proposed and then a final rule on that?
Yes, we're continuing to work closely with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation and the Fairbanks North Star Borough to continue to provide technical assistance there. I think our team has met with the mayor a number of times this year just to talk about PM 2.5, more specifically the challenges of wood stoves. And we're continuing to coordinate and meet regularly with NESCOM to better understand some of the concerns. And then we've since 2016 awarded over $31 million in grants. So we're continuing to have that conversation to look at some of the unique aspects of the Fairbanks community. And we're just going to continue to push that ball.
Well, if there is a new proposed rule, we want to make sure that there's going to be plenty of opportunity for public review and comment on that, and just making sure that these very unique concerns related to the issues there, again, primarily in Fairbanks North Star Borough, are considered.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned wood stove testing, and again, this is an issue where you have a real, genuine, committed effort by those in the community to address a problem, and we have we've got a situation where we don't have the technology or the standards that are in place to appropriately address this issue. So what we have is a situation where people in the Fairbanks area, in a non-attainment area, want to try to address their own level of emissions. They're being told that if you buy a new wood stove, then you're going to be able to make some impact there. and yet the agency is letting wood stoves come to market that don't meet the existing standards. And so we've got a great program through the Targeted Airshed Grant, but this wood stove change-out, we're using good federal money, important taxpayer dollars, but because of the standards issue, it's not making a difference. And that's not fair to the constituents. It's not fair to the agency. It's not fair to, it's really not fair to anyone. So this is something that we've got to do better on. I had the mayor and his assistant fly out to Washington, D.C., specifically to have a meeting with folks in the agency. And when they got here, they were told, okay, fine, your meeting is on Zoom, and we'll meet you, come online at X o'clock. They came to my office instead, and I said, no, you've flown all the way from Fairbanks, Alaska to be here. We're going to get the individuals that you've been talking to in. This goes to the point that Senator Capito raised about whether or not EPA folks are actually back in office. And they told me that was the very first week that they had been called back in and weren't quite sure what their protocols are. I just share that with you because it was a real live instance where you've got a serious issue with constituents. They have managed to make the effort to come back here, and their government isn't there. So their senator has to call the agency and demand a meeting. They came over, worked out fine. They got good information back and forth. I think both sides would agree it was a meeting worth taking. But I just need to know that we are going to see some better efforts in how EPA is reviewing the current wood stove standards and how, in the meantime, you're engaging the industry to fix the current flaws here. So it's something that shouldn't be so hard, and I'm hoping that we're making better progress than we've seen. So I've gone on far longer than I have, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me raise that issue before the administrator this morning.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I keep up with the Mississippi River on my phone because of the unnecessary flooding that we just stay under a threat of. And a few days ago, the Corps closed the Steel Bayou floodgates because the Mississippi River is on the rise. And that means the rivers and streams that are inside the levee system, they have no exit because we have no pumps. So with any measurable rainfall right now today, as we sit here in the next several hours, in the next few days, we could be looking at another flood. And I just want to invite you that if that does occur, I would love for you to come down and join me in a helicopter ride over the river so to see the significance. And that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. I imagine, Administrator, you're familiar with the term insect Armageddon?
Yes.
We've seen a massive drop in insects in this country. I'm really struck by how, being a kid, when we drive north and south in the state, we'd always be stopping to clean all the insects off our windshield. And now that's a very, very rare moment. And we see it in things, for example, like the collapse of the Monarch. And California has taken efforts to do things such as plant significant amounts of milkweed. But one of the things that I took a trip down to California to go to one of the overwintering spots along the coast, and they're noting some of the challenges include things like with climate change, the milkweed rhythm is changing, and sometimes the milkweed isn't out at the time that the monarchs need to start leaving the coast to the first kind of evolution of, because they go through several life cycles of subsequent groups in a single year. And also, that milkweed that people might plant to help out monarchs in their home gardens and so forth, it may be contaminated with neonicotinoids or other pesticides that will actually hurt pollinators rather than help them. Anyway, this issue of pollinators is a big deal for the broader ecosystem. And how is the EPA really tackling this problem?
Well, thank you for that question. And, we recognize, as you do, that pollinators are important to the environment and the economy. And I think the Endangered Species Act is one of EPA's best tools to protect endangered pollinators when we register pesticides. And so we've invested heavily in strengthening our work in this area. In the 2023 budget, it proposes to include, for the first time ever, a targeted increase for our ESA pesticide work. So we've asked for $4.9 million and 10 FTE to focus specifically on this issue. We're also working to finish our review of some of the pesticides that pollinators are vulnerable to. Although some of this work has slipped a little bit behind where we want to be, we are continuing to forge ahead on this very important issue. So it's a priority, and it's reflected in our budget.
I'll give you just one example of the types of things that might be real facts on the ground changes, and that is to have a system in which we can make sure that as we replant pollinators or the flowers and appropriate plants for pollinators, we are making sure that they are raised in a fashion that is, that the plants are prepared in the nurseries in a fashion that doesn't make them damaging to insects rather than helpful. So it's just one of the pieces to look at. I hope that there will be a moment 10 years from now when we can say that 98% collapse in the monarch has been reversed before we lose the western monarch, but it's just it is a beautiful symbol, but it is representative of the broader challenge of a whole classes of pollinators, including obviously our bee populations. I want to turn to your broad effort to rebuild the EPA, and we have seen a proposal for a really significant expansion, and you've got a lot going on with toxic chemicals and water supplies and hydrofluorocarbons. You've got a massive set of responsibilities. So as you look at your plan to go forward and restore your workforce, you're also facing a retirement wave. And I understand that 43% of your workforce have enough service that they could be retirement eligible within 5 years. And so not only rebuilding the vacancies you have now, but preparing for probably a significant wave of retirements. How will your budget proposal rebuild and modernize EPA's enforcement and compliance efforts in the context of this personnel challenge?
I think that the enforcement piece is something that I've indicated we are wanting to build up and build capacity up very quickly, because we have a lot of laws and rules on the books that just aren't being enforced that protect our most vulnerable. So our enforcement budget is mostly comprised of many of those any of the employees that are in our regional offices. Our 2023 budget request is about $104 million. We're asking for 122 FTE. That will ensure EPA can follow through with compliance and enforce our nation's environmental laws. I would say that, unfortunately, our enforcement budget has remained flat over time as payroll costs have increased, in addition to cost of living adjustments. And so, as a result, during the past decade, we've seen about a 22% of our enforcement capacity or resources drop. We need more boots on the ground. We need to be able to follow through and do our job to protect our fellow citizens. And so this FY 2023 budget has that pragmatic and practical request in there to get us to that workforce level that we need to be at.
So I did specifically mention enforcement, but let me turn more broadly to your overall number of staff that you need to add. And I was glancing back looking at the FY23 request proposes to fund 16,200 FTE, an increase of 2,000 above FY21 staffing levels. So now let me just kind of zoom out to this broader challenge of those. How essential are those 2,000 staff members, and I think you're going. Is that in addition to the 1,000 that you're hoping to hire through the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
We're looking at an addition, yes. We know that the resources that we're asking for the bipartisan infrastructure law, those are resources that look at a 5-year window. We're trying to really rebuild the core EPA workforce here. To the point you just made, about 25% of all EPA employees are eligible to retire, with 19% eligible in the next 5 years. And so we can look at just really basic examples. If we want to implement the TSCA laws the way Congress has asked that we do, we need the bodies there to do that. We have about 200 less staff to focus on processing and getting new chemicals to the market than we did in 1988. So we need to rebuild capacity at the core, but we also really need to rebuild capacity in strategic programs that, quite frankly, are trying to keep pace with a growing economy.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for highlighting the toxic chemicals bill, the TSCA bill, with the Lautenberg rewrite of it, Lautenberg amendments, and consumers in America just kind of really believe that we are monitoring the chemicals that go into products in a way we're not. But TSCA makes that possible as rewritten, and but you need the personnel. The 200 FTE that you noted, additional 200 FTE to make it work. I think that's incredibly important. And on that note, I'll turn back to my colleague from Alaska.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the Administrator for being here this morning, for the engagement that you've had with each of us on issues, some very parochial, some more national in scope, and just would ask that you continue with a very direct engagement as you have committed to. I share the chairman's desire and concern and knowing what we can anticipate with regards to the guidance and the guidelines with the congressionally directed spending. This is something where I think we know full well, certainly on the water and wastewater projects that we have in Alaska, a very, very keen interest in starting to move out on this quickly. And in many parts of my state, we've got issues where timing is pretty important, as the season is not unlimited as we work to build out these projects. I wanted to just ask a question, and based on your response to the chairman, you probably have not yet determined, but the staffing set-asides from the infrastructure bill funding, curious to know whether they could be used to help offset the costs of administering the congressionally directed spending projects. That's something that has been raised. So as you are considering that, perhaps you should just include that as part of the discussion as you're moving forward in laying down this particular guidance. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank the Administrator, and thank you for having a good hearing today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. And there are no other statements. The hearing record will be open until the close of business on May 25th. Thank you very much, Administrator Regan. I think about the huge set of issues that you're responsible for. I know you're diligently trying to make a difference through your leadership and your rebuilding of the agency. We support you in that. This matters a great deal for all of us, so thank you. No further comments. This hearing is adjourned.